This podcast is about all things related to a disparate community of Americans without a name. We are the AM, A-M-M. A for Arab, M for Muslim, and another M for Middle Eastern. By heritage and American by choice or circumstance. But more importantly, we are separated and alienated from each other. It's time to get in front of the racist PR, clean out the cobwebs, and get to the business of defining ourselves. We are here to elevate AM voices. You ready to hear some tough truths? I am Banafsha Madai-Najad.
This is Ramesh Nadeem.
I'm Roy Casagranda, and this is The Defining Moment.
Hello everyone, salam, welcome once again to I-AMM, The Defining Moment. I'm Ramesh Nadeem, in their pronouns, Banafsha.
Hey y'all, she, her.
And we have on Ameera again from last time. All right, so we left off the story with Ameera having joined an online radical Muslim community and having come out as gay. But there's still a lot of story to go. Ameera is, still going and still heading in certain directions. So let's, check in.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ameera Khan. I use she, her pronouns, and I was just given my story of coming out last time. Would you like me to start from the not the beginning, but start from where I left off?
Yes, please go for it.
All right, then, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Oh Allah, oh my nourisher, open for me my chest, not just in a trans way, but رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني, and untie the knot from my tongue so that people may understand what I say. And I will acknowledge quickly that the land that I am on is the traditional land of the Wahpekute and the Ocheti Shakowin people in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And recognizing who they are is a start, but we can't ever stop there, because there can be no reconciliation without conciliation or peacemaking, and there can be no peacemaking without reparations. And so I mentioned them to begin my sharing my story. Okay. So we stopped at me joining the Facebook group, right? The Radical Muslims Facebook group, and coming out as gay. And that, so I do intend later on in this podcast to share some of those insights that book that I discovered in the Radical Muslims Facebook group, Homosexuality in Islam by Dr. Scott Siraj al-Haq Kugel, how that was a bridge for me to really move from like my self-doubt and restriction to a place of expansion, inclusion, and like wholeness within my faith and my identity. But for now, I'm going to finish up my story. So at this point in time, so it is mid 2016, so like the summer. I'm part of the Facebook group Radical Muslims. I've come out as a gay male. I received news that I was accepted to become an RA, resident advisor, if y'all haven't been to college. And so an RA will typically live on campus with other students and like sort of act as like a liaison between the students and like the administration, and like help with housing stuff, and just feeling stable when you're a freshman and new to college and all of these things. So the big catch for me here is that it provided me with free housing, which was important because I am poor and I cannot pay for housing outside of what my family is already paying for, but also B, I don't want to live in my family's house anymore. I don't want to be under their roof, because now that I've come out as gay, now my parents and my community start providing me all of this, like, this just clapback, right? And this all of this it was a lot of my mother having internal emotional toil about it, and then her taking it all out on me. But then and you know, like the biggest complaint that always happens with these is like, in Bangla we say manush ki bolbe, right? What will other people say? What will people say? Biggest complaint, right? They're just like, if you come out as gay, how does that look for me? It's a very selfish way of looking at these things, but it's also kind of a collectivist way of looking at things. So I understand it, but I also didn't want to deal with it because I didn't care what people would think of me, because this was life-saving for me to come out as gay. So I worked that summer. I worked a lot that summer. I tried my best to not stay in my house, and I counted down the days until I could finally move into my new dorm. And I did. The first possible day you could move in, I moved into the dorm and I fell asleep. And I remember that sensation that it was just really quiet. So it was just so quiet, and I was like, I'm used to like my Deshi, you know, family just being loud and hustle and bustle and noisy, and waking up on Saturday mornings hearing my mom yelling at my dad in the downstairs. You know, like this is what I was used to. So it was really quiet, but I also felt the most relief I'd ever felt for a couple, since besides coming out, really. It was just like, wow, I've made it. I made it outside of the house. I can start my life as me, somewhere that isn't with my parents, who will always be sort of judging me for it. And so I started as an RA the summer of 2016, fall of 2016. Like summer is the training, and then fall semester started, and then I began actually being on the job as an RA. And yes, it was tough, but I also am very, very grateful to that experience because of the housing, but also because of the experience itself was really good for me. But most importantly, because my boss was also queer. His name's Jeff, and he was a genderqueer human with just a long-term committed boyfriend at the time. And I was like, that's cool. But what I didn't expect from him was that he made so much space for me to explore my own identity, to explore my own thoughts about different aspects of philosophy and aspects of like Islam and community and collectivism, but how they clash with how those have been clashing with my knowing myself as gay, and ending a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement that I'd already understood a lot of, but helping me put it into context with like greater like incarceration, or with like feminism and patriarchy, right?
How did he create that space for you? And then in addition to that, for our audience, what you described their gender as genderqueer. What do you think that like meant to them, or what does that mean in general when we use the term genderqueer?
Genderqueer, to the best of my understanding, is just the idea of queering gender, right? To like remove sort of the arbitrariness of what makes a man and what makes a woman, right? And sort of exist fluidly between those categories. And so this is how he identified while using he, him, and they, them pronouns. He made space for me because every week it was, we had a weekly check-in between the RA and the residence hall coordinator. And during this weekly check-in, while we would sometimes talk a little bit about logistical stuff, okay, this thing is coming up and you've got this amount of budget for it, yada, yada. But most of the time he would allow space for me just to like debrief and share what was going on in my internal world, and just hold it non-judgmentally, hold it affirmatively and sort of give me positive feedback and other angles of looking at whatever I was going through as well. And yeah, in one of these one-on-one sessions, actually, I was talking about like, look, I understand that, excuse me, I understand that even as a person of color, I am not Black. So I am not visibly Black. So I cannot understand what Black oppression feels like internally, what it does to your psyche, what it does to your community. Like, these are not things I know intuitively. I also, as a man, I don't have that intuitive understanding of patriarchy either. From a woman's perspective, I was like, I am not a woman. And so I don't know what women go through. So I don't know how to best help them, right? Apart from listening, very, very close listening, right? The same strategy I deployed of shut up and listen had helped me to a point. And then I was at a point where I was like, I still don't quite understand it. So I told Jeff, I'm going to do an experiment. My experiment is that I'm going to live as a woman so that I can understand patriarchy from the other side, so that I have an understanding of both sides. And he was in full support of this, right? And he was like, how are you going to do that? I was like, well, I want to, first of all, just dress femme, right? But I also want to hang out with like more femme folks and like listen to their experiences and see. And I want to just appear more femme so that other folks will treat me the way that they treat femme folks, and I can notice the difference, right? So it was my experience. It was my experiment. That's how this started out. So they said, okay, go ahead. And so, so in 2016, and near fall 2016, I started dressing more femme, and I started like trying to put on makeup and all of these things, right, and go to classes, right? And I noticed like a difference in how I was treated, but more than that, I noticed that femme identity felt like right at home to me. Like it did not feel like I was putting on a mask, or I was like I was being performative. Like I had that because I was also, imposter syndrome affects everyone. So it did feel a little performative at times, but it also felt really, really at home, like on the head, nail on the head, just like, this is how I'm supposed to be. I was like, what is this feeling? I was expecting more like clash and more fear of that hadith where it's like, oh, men who dress as women are going to hell or whatever it is, right? But I didn't have that fear. I wasn't so concerned about it because of just the elation, what I now know was gender euphoria, right? That so that's what I was experiencing. And then I was like,
tell us what gender euphoria is. Yeah.
It's just the sheer joy of aligning your presentation with your true self. And that joy is something so many trans people talk about, for example, post-surgery. Like discovering that they were trans and like dressing and like putting on makeup or the latter or the opposite of that, right? Not putting on makeup and like feeling that sort of that euphoria of being like, wow, like this feels right. This feels like me.
Yeah. And then what was it like for that? So like there's the gender euphoria that happens when you're when you engage with like gender expression in like private or personal spaces, like in at home in front of your mirror or whatever else. But then there's also this social aspect that you were talking about a little bit. So what was it like for you when you were presenting more as femme in your classes and in these public-ish spaces?
I'd never been catcalled before in my life. It was my first time getting catcalled, and I was like someone at like a Goodwill was like check out that ass, and he was like yelling from across the store, and then I turn around and then he becomes horrified because like I don't have makeup or anything on, and he's like, oh my god, right? And he turns away, and I was like, okay. That first, obviously clearly transphobic, but it was also a moment of like, oh, like I look kind of like a woman from a certain angle in public, right? So there's a little bit of like sort of juxtaposition of like disgust, but also like gender euphoria there.
Yeah.
Right. So like that was one thing I definitely experienced. I also noticed that my opinions, my personal sort of stories were just brushed away a little more as being inconsequential. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm a spoken word performer, so I have to perform my pain to make it feel valid to other people, right? So I did that a little bit more to actually get listened to. So those are a couple of the things that I started noticing. And I was like, okay, I think I'm getting a feel for this, but also, why does this feel at home? Why do I not want to stop? Like, I don't get it. So then I listened to a couple of YouTube videos about trans folks. And this was completely out of curiosity because I was like, yeah, I understand a bit of like what patriarchy feels like from a woman's side. But now, isn't there like trans folks? Like, I knew a couple of them, but I didn't really know too many. I was like, okay, let me see what's up about them, because I haven't learned a lot about trans folks. I haven't indulged myself in sort of that world that they live in and the terms they use and like their experiences and healthcare or employment, all those things. I didn't know any of these things. So I was like, let me just listen to trans people, right? Because that's the number one way of learning these things. I listened to Black folks. That's how I learned about Black Lives Matter. I listened to women. That's how I learned about patriarchy. And now I was like, let me listen to trans people. So I look up these videos of trans people talking about their experience on YouTube, right? And some of these were not well-produced videos. It was just like a teenager in like a dimly lit room talking about their experience with like a little lisp, and it was very cute. And but I was listening to all of these different experiences. I was like, wow, like that's exactly how I feel. I feel gender euphoria when I'm in these clothes and I'm perceived as a woman. I'm like happier. I'm happier as just a human being living, even though I'm facing more oppression. And these trans women were talking about the same experience, and like non-binary folks. And I was like, that means I must be trans. And I was like, no way. Like, I already came out as gay. Like, why do I have to come out again? I don't want to do that. Right? And so I talked with Jeff. I was like, this is what I'm feeling. Like, it's a hard one. And he was like, you don't have to push yourself to do anything you don't want to do. But like, yeah, like your feelings are all valid. And if you feel that your gender, that this feeling of happiness you feel is in fact gender euphoria, and therefore, in fact, you are trans, that's valid. And congratulations on like taking another step and finding out who you really are and like identifying your feelings, because not having vocabulary for feelings is why a lot of feelings get mixed up, and you have miscommunications and you have internal conflict and all of these things. So having a word for what I was feeling was just something to be congratulated on by Jeff. And so I was like, that's really true. That's really fair.
What were you thinking about in terms of like the other identities you hold that you were, kind of able to, right? So you were also Bengali at the same time. You were also Muslim at the same time. You were still in the same city, presumably around like the same folks. You were walking past the same MSA people who you were interacting with maybe 6 months earlier in a very different way. What was that like for you? Did you ever have? Yeah.
I came out as so what I did actually was I talked to Jeff all about this in the fall of 2016. So then New Year's Day, January 1st, 2017, I said, I'm going to use she, her, hers pronouns. And like, this is what I'm going to use. I announced this to my staff, all the other RAs. I announced this to my residents, my classes. And I was like, let me just see where this goes. Let me see how this feels. And it just felt right. So I was living like this, and it felt right everywhere. And then when I interacted with MSA people, then it was different. And And the good thing here is that I'm living on campus, so I'm not interacting with my family. I'm not interacting with the masjid people at the masjid, the county masjid where I lived right next to back in, with my parents, right?
Yeah.
I get to push their influences out of the way while I interact only with MSA, which is Muslim Student Association, students, right? So yes, these students were Muslim, and yes, they were like the ones who I had been with since freshman year, but I didn't have a root. Like, I did not grow up with most of these people, right?
Yeah.
Only a couple of them. So but all of them did look up to me as a spiritual leader, as someone who has memorized the Quran, as the religious chair of the MSA. Then I came out as gay, and something changed. They were like, can you even lead prayer anymore because you're gay? I don't know. And like, they started, as I was saying before, stopped listening to my opinion in MSA board meetings for ideas and stuff. And then I came out as trans, and that was kind of the final nail on the coffin. Most of my MSA friends just completely stopped interacting with me at all after I started using she, her pronouns, and dressing femme. And this felt like this was a social death for me, right? Because MSA was one of the places that I found and called home on this Catholic Jesuit campus. They were one of my sort of the places where I went to recharge. But now if I go there, I feel even more drained, recharged, because so it's like, if I go to non-Muslims, they don't understand my theology. They don't understand my hadith. When I say tire camel, they're like, what does that mean? Right? They don't have this frame of reference. But then I go to the Muslim folks, and they don't have any frame of reference to speak about gender or sexual identity, except outside of like damning it, right? So it was really hard to experience that social death. What happened afterward, I think, is something that I'm always grateful for, which is, even after having lost all these MSA contacts, and after having lost my oh shoot, I forgot. This just came to my mind. I actually ran for MSA president after coming out. And I heard
Mubarak. Oh my goodness.
Because it was like an old dream of mine since I was and I always thought I would become the MSA president.
And you were in line for the throne, right? Like, you were prepping for this. You were sort of, in the board meetings, speaking the right kind of way, all of this stuff, heading up the organization in such ways, displaying all this leadership all over the place. All of Ameera's typical brilliance. Yeah,
except for the conference weekend where I took acid, right? I was extremely active in the MSA, the Muslim Student Association, and all of their organizing, all of the halaqas. I gave many halaqas in that group. I led many
What's
prayers.
a halaqa, Ameera?
A halaqa is just a talk about God. It's just, that's literally all it is. And it can be about anything, but it relates to Islam in some way. But when I ran for president, literally the other folks who were not even running for president conspired with each other behind my backs, created their own WhatsApp groups without me in it, and spoke to each other being like, we cannot let Ameera become the president. And so they all voted for the other president, who, I mean, he is also qualified, but it was just, it was really icky. And that was when I fully realized, I was like, this is not my space anymore. I can't recharge here anymore. And that really hurt. Yeah. But going through this pain made me realize, okay, let me look for more fertile soil. Yeah. The soil this group of people is not bearing fruits for me anymore, right? The soil has become barren. So
when did you start using the word social death about this experience?
When I started losing friends, when I lost my friends, let's say, lost so many of my friends for coming out.
Mm.
And not just friends, but close friends, friends who I relied on and counted on and shared like private thoughts with. Right. When I lost those, that's when it really felt like a social death. Right. So I'm here with my only like confidant really being my boss, which is a boss relationship and not a friend relationship. Right. And with that, I sort of went into 2017 and I was like, well, I'm not going to be the MSA president anymore. I'm probably not going to be affiliated with MSA anymore. I do, however, I have always, since I was young, had a strong interest in interfaith work. So I was like, let me see if I can be part of the Interfaith Alliance. And it was relatively small, relatively inactive, but I was like, I've already been involved with all of you in the past. Can I run for president? And no one else was really rearing for the presidency, and so it was a pretty easy vote for me, and I became the president of the Interfaith Alliance, which next year, right, for my 2017 to 2018 academic year, which was my last year in college, my senior year, I took the Interfaith Alliance to just a different level. We did so many collaborations with Amnesty International and with MSA and with other faith groups on campus ministry. We actually reached out to Washington University, which is like WashU is St. Louis University's like rival in the same city, right? And we did like a joint interfaith week with their campus and had Ibtihaj Muhammad, the Olympian, the first Olympian hijabi fencer, come to our campus and speak during that week. And it was just really, really life-giving. And I made so many new contacts and new friends through this in the greater St. Louis interfaith scene. So like, for example, I had never met Dr. Billy Mayo, who is a Black Baha'i professor not professor, but a Black Baha'i doctor who is highly active in the Baha'i community, and she had so much knowledge to give. I had never met Reverend David Mell, who ran the Interfaith Partnership of St. Louis, and who is just an incredibly wise human and gave me so many like VIP access to like interfaith events in the St. Louis area that normally would cost like something accessible to a student, a college student. I met Dr. Bahar Bastani, right, who is a endocrinologist maybe, but also like a very theologically understanding Shia human in the St. Louis community. And I met all of these people who I would have never met if I just restricted myself and just kept those old communities of the MSA, the Muslim
Yeah. I love that term you use, theologically understanding. We should all strive to be a little bit more theologically understanding. But you were exposed to this broader community of folks who were working in interfaith spaces, who belong to all sorts of faith spaces and identities and theologies and traditions and all of this. Yeah. What was that?
This allowed me to start sort of what I called an SLC, a spiritual life community, where we met bi-weekly at MTUG, and MTUG is Metro Trans Umbrella Group. This is a nonprofit organization founded by trans people for trans people in the St. Louis metro region. And they just provided so many services. They provided they still, during this COVID-19 crisis, they are providing trans people in the entire St. Louis area with food, as their only source of food, with sanitizing equipment, with toilet paper, with all of these necessities that were a lot harder to find, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, but even now. and definitely into the future, because this COVID-19 is coronavirus is here to stay. For at least another year. But yeah. So I think estimates were like, I think by 2022, like maximum a fifth of the US population will be vaccinated. This is the estimate I've heard. So it's here to stay as an issue. But yeah. So I was able to really plug into not only the broader interfaith community of St. Louis, but also the broader trans queer community through MTUG. And I'd never met these people at a queer scene. I'd never been to a drag show until my senior year. After I'd come out as trans, I was like, let me take a look at this. Fine, if this is gonna be like what my friends now are doing, like, because I did make gay friends, right? I was like, okay, sure. If you're gonna talk me into come seeing this, I'll do it. And I really enjoyed it, actually. So yeah, it was just really, really, I started thriving in ways that I didn't expect to be thriving. And I didn't know where it came from, but I know that I couldn't access it until I had lost those old friends, those MSA friends who weren't accepting of me.
Yeah. What did that thriving look like? What did that mean for you? Like day to day, how was life different for you when you were thriving?
I was happy. I had a lot more confidence, sometimes founded and sometimes unfounded. But I was open to, I allowed myself, it's funny because like by forcing myself to be open to other people's experience, I found myself as trans, and then I lost these closed-minded, if you will, friends. And now I learned like of so many more open-minded people, and I'm making friends with them. The Radical Muslims group, Taya Mari Little, encouraged me and other queer Muslims in that group to apply for the Muslim Youth Leadership Council, and I got accepted for that. Where I still currently am on with Ramesh as a council member of that. I met a lot more even trans queer Muslims in the St. Louis community who had never ever come out because they knew that the St. Louis community was extremely conservative.
Yeah.
And they came out to me being like, I'm gay, I'm bisexual. And coming out while you're part of this masjid community is like a big deal, right? So it was just like, it was a lot of thriving for me in senior year after having gone through so many struggles, and I was just really grateful for it. I also had an on-campus job through FAFSA, right? So you get the work study grant, and this particular job actually was with Dr. Brian Sokol, who is the head of campus ministry. Head of the CSE Center for Service and Community Engagement. And he essentially, with the position at his department, he essentially let me do all of the activism work I was doing with Metro Trans Umbrella Group, with Interfaith Alliance, with Interfaith Partnership of Greater St. Louis. All of this on his payroll. So I was getting paid to do things that I loved, which was mind-blowing to me. Having worked 80 hours a week the summer prior, right? Like falling asleep at desks and stuff while I'm like supposed to be in the front desk signing people. And it was really good. Then from there, I got my job offer at Epic. I moved to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Very white, very queer, but very white. And I worked there for a couple of years. In Madison, Wisconsin, first at Epic, and then Epic is a healthcare systems corporation. It's about 10,000 people big and only has 160 Black employees or so, which is telling of the sort of, we're not racist, but we barely hire any Black folks sort of racism. But
Ameera, maybe these are portions that, we can edit out or not sure, whatever else, but this is sort of, you've also, I think I remember you talking about your,
if I'm going to finish this up very quickly, I worked at Epic, then I worked at Mobile Doorman, and then the coronavirus pandemic started, and I was unemployed, and then I started working for Carrot Health, where I currently am today. So, bit of a trajectory there. Okay.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off mid trajectory.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. I was wondering about.
We can edit some of that out too, because I was just getting down tunnels.
No, I was wondering. I meant like we can edit out the portion where I ask you this interruptee question. But the interruptee question is, we had in previous conversation, I think, talked a lot about the when you went to the Interfaith Youth Council, whatever, the national conference for that. And that was a very particular kind of experience for you. And then I'm also curious if you want to talk about your Muslim Youth Leadership Council experience and what was it like to be in physical space with these queer Muslims.
Yeah. I love this.
I also now that we're asking questions and now we're on a roll with questions, I think you've talked some about this, but I'm curious to know if there's any movement at all in the positions that your old circle has now because of your presence or because of just years having passed. And has anybody reached out to you from the folks that sort of fell off? And your parents, I'm curious about family, but again, none of this has to be shared. These are the things that are coming up for me, having heard about your story.
I'm going to write these down in the chat. So I start going off on tangents again and rambling.
And
I'm not rambling. Oh my goodness.
We're not going to get to Scott Kugel today, which is just fine with me.
I'll see. Then. Okay.
And yeah, it is. And I used MyLC assuming that was your first like physical in-person interaction with a group of queer and trans Muslims. But if it's not, then talk about whatever the first experience with space was or whatever strikes you as most interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, back after a little bit of an edit. I'm just stretching a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, bismillah. So one of the opportunities that Interfaith Alliance allowed me was attending the Interfaith Youth Corps. The Interfaith Youth Corps essentially is a group started by Ibu Patel, an Ismaili Muslim, I think, who lives in the Chicago area. And he started the Interfaith Youth Corps just as a nonprofit organization to help people from different faiths communicate and talk to one another about common issues and common goals that they can work towards together, right? And so they have the ILI, Interfaith Leadership Institute, every summer in Chicago as like a big conference where they bring people from across the country, and I think perhaps even other countries as well, to come and speak and do different panels and stuff. So this was huge. This is like my utopia. Kind of, I was dreaming of attending something like this for years, and finally, with that Interfaith Alliance position as the president, I was allowed to. So I was like, great. What am I gonna do? I don't know. I just went in there kind of blind, right? Because I had no idea what these sort of interfaith spaces would look like, and it was incredible. It was so incredible. I met people of so many different faith backgrounds, and many of who are queer. It's the first time I've ever met not a Satanist, a pagan, like a proper pagan, to Norse gods and everything. I was like, wow, I've never met a pagan before. Y'all are actually really cool. And like one of these was like a pagan black gay minister as well, and it was just incredible to hear his perspective. And I was like, I never thought I would be listening to pagans back when I was in MSA, but here I am, and it's so cool and so life-giving. I met people who are of different, like multi-faiths at the same time. So I met someone who was both Jewish and Buddhist, and I was like, didn't know that could be a thing. That was a possibility. That's so cool. I met Muslims who were queer, inclusive, and accepting, and who were like, yeah, you want to go to a gay bar? Let's go. Straight Muslims. And I was like, whoa. This has never been my experience. I didn't even I don't even drink, right? But I ended up somehow, after all of these really, really cool panels, going out for the night after all of the sessions were done for dinner, and I found a bunch of other queer folk who, the queer Buddhist and Jewish non-binary person in particular, I was like, I just want to know more about you. So I found them and I was like, you're cool. Can we like hang out? Can we like talk? And they were like, yeah, totally. So when we went out for dinner, together, and it ended up being like at a gay bar or whatever, and it was great and it was fine, and I learned a lot about them. Eventually at the end of the night, I was like, I need to drive all the way out to the suburbs for the place that I'm staying at, and they were like, just stay in my hotel room, it's fine. And so I crashed for the night with someone I had just met in a hotel room. And I'm not the kind of person who does that. It takes time for me to like bond with folks, but this was something that I did, and I was like, I felt really blessed because I didn't have to drive all the way back out to the suburbs. And I just got to spend more time with this incredible person. The next day I met other queer Muslims, a couple of them. I did not get to spend much time with them, but I was just like, whoa, other queer Muslims, what is happening here? Right. In physical space really was a big deal because I'd never shared space with those with other queer Muslims before. But then the conference ended. It was only 3 days, and it was packed with all of these other things that we were expected to do. And so it ended, and I was like, dang, I wish I could spend more time with all of these cool, incredible people. And it sounds really basic. You go to a conference, there are other cool people there, you talk with them, and you learn a lot, right? In concept, it's just really cool. But in like practice, that's like one of the most ancient ways of learning anything, right? Like the whole idea of apprenticeship and mastership, right? You go to someone who has experienced more than you, and you learn through not just asking questions, but just by being in their presence and like seeing how they move through the world and move through whatever skills in particular you're trying to learn from them or whatever it is. So which is why this COVID pandemic and isolation has got people fucked up, right? One of the many, many reasons why it is so hard on people, right? For people like me who really want to learn and who want to be in community with people, right? And who learn best from being in community, like direct physical proximity to someone. You don't get that. So I left this conference satisfied but wanting more.
Yeah.
And then I found the Muslim Youth Leadership Council, right? And so this, after I graduated, was when I first got to attend Advocates for Youth. So Muslim Youth Leadership Council is a subsidiary, I guess, of Advocates for Youth, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that does reproductive justice advocacy and is headquartered out of Washington, D.C., but has youth activists from across the country. Being part of the Muslim Youth Leadership Council, I became one of these youth activists, and I was allowed to do so many things, but the first and the biggest one of which was attending a conference with all of the other youth activists in Washington, D.C., all paid for, right? So I'm like, great, I don't have to worry about like buying a ticket and like getting myself bankrupt because I'm a student, right? So I fly out here to Washington, D.C. There's like at least 100 other youth activists there. And that was the first place that Jummah, that Friday, that I actually got to be in community with other queer Muslims. And I gave a khutbah that day that I had prepared, but I wasn't really prepared for the experience of being in a room with 20 other queer Muslims, right? It was just something I'd been craving for my entire life without necessarily knowing that it was something possible or even something that I could ask for to manifest. And yes, Ramesh was there. Ramesh was there at the Muslim Youth Leadership Council my very first time. And it was just, yeah, it was a magical 4 or 5 days. I've made friendships that are still close and who will still receive invites to my weddings. Hint, hint. And it is something that is really near, dear, and precious to my heart. The ability to build community with people who are across the freaking world, right? But out of a shared experience, out of a shared commonality and desire to change the world, really. So all of these driven, motivated young people, wow. I definitely felt like I was like out of place there that first year, because I was coming in with imposter syndrome. And then I learned like all of these people are just as genuine and as inexperienced as I am, but their efforts, their consistencies, right? Their sort of community and their collective like philosophy that they're working with is what is getting so much of this work done, right? When we did the digital campaign, the #Muslim campaign with ILC, right? Which is where we tweeted and we posted on Instagram and Facebook and all other things. I don't think TikTok was a thing back then, but we were posting things with the #Muslim and, right? So we are Muslim and queer. We are Muslim and trans. We are Muslim and an engineer and a wife and a student or whatever it is, right? To share that like Muslim is a box that people like to put us in, but we are multidimensional human beings with many different identities and many different hobbies and livelihoods and everything, and all of us deserve to be humanized and to be given, basic access like non-Muslim people. And we got Rashida Talib, we got Ilhan Omar, our Muslims in Congress to like tweet with the hashtag, and it was incredible. Like we got, I think, of 1.7 million views or something total that year. And I was like, this is started by like just the queer Muslims in this room, right? This is started by like 20, 25 people and the funding from Advocates for Youth, right? So I was just like, yeah, that gave me hope, and like a human, like a small group of highly dedicated people can actually, change the world. They can actually have an output, a like effect on the world greater than themselves.
Yeah. Ameera, what is your vision? What do you want that output in that effect to be?
I want my vision is so multifaceted, right? I have so many different visions, right? I want the carceral state to end, right? The 2.3 million Americans that are incarcerated at this moment, a fourth of whom are just technically in pre-trial detention, but will be detained for like months or years, right? With no crime convicted of them. The many who are in prison because they couldn't afford a cash bail for a nonviolent drug offense, right? For smoking weed, right? The carceral state and removing that, especially the egregiousness of how it manifests in America specifically, disproportionately targeting Black folks, Black men, and Hispanic folks and Hispanic men, and just taking, honestly, trillions of dollars out of our own economy to oppress people, right? To oppress our own people. It's bonkers. It's nuts. And one of my visions is hopefully for that carceral state to not just have reforms, because reformist policy changes will not solve the pipelines, right? It will not solve the pipelines to prisons, and it will not solve poverty. It will not solve the surveillance state. That's one of my many visions. But I think if we're going to keep it small, if we're going to keep it personal, I want Muslims and queer people to be able to see each other's perspectives, to not be at each other's throats, right? For Muslims to stop being homophobic, and for queer people to stop being Islamophobic, right? To be able to join as forces together, and to understand that like all human beings are worthy of love and are worthy of living as fulfilled as they can be, right? You don't need to repress part of yourself in order to prosper and to help others prosper. And of course, for me, what I needed to bridge that gap was the theology, was the understanding of those verses and those interpretations that damned homosexuals, and really changing my interpretation of those verses to one that is actually liberating and one that actually makes more sense, right? Moving away from that crowd mentality.
Oh my goodness.
As for Banash's question, she had one about did anyone actually try to accept me after I came out and I experienced that social death. A couple, actually, and enough, I would say. Enough people did. I had an auntie reach out to me after I came out being like, listen, Betty, like, I understand that, like, you're trans and I completely accept and support you. And I was like, not even close with this auntie before. I was like, I only saw you at one rishta and like one wedding, right, ceremony. And now she's coming back here and she's like, listen, I'm supporting you. What did you eat for dinner today? Send me pictures. Like, oh, you met a new girl. What's her name? Send me pictures of her. What's she like? You know, everything. She's just like, she was doing all of these from a good place. And I was like, wow, thank you, auntie. Like, and there was even like other aunties in like Madison, Wisconsin, when I moved there, and I actually knew like no one in Wisconsin, right? I met another auntie there who came up to me and was like, can I like have dinner with you or lunch with you someday, and I'll pay for it all. I just want to chat about you and your experience as a trans person. I was like, yes, please. Like, I would love if more people from the Muslim community would listen to queer people and listen to their voices. And so she sat down with me, and it made me cry nearly that she was like, I have a son who's 3 years old. And sometimes he talks to me, he's like, oh, I just want to wear dresses or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any dresses or whatever. So, but she's like, yeah, my 3-year-old son wants to wear dresses sometimes. Should I be concerned that he is trans? And if so, her concern was not, is my son trans and therefore I need to run away from this? Her concern was, is my son trans? And therefore I need to be supportive of him as much as possible so that he can live his truest self. And like just coming from that perspective of it, just coming at it with care and love and support is what I think a lot of the Muslim community lacks, because they have this theology that stands in the way. They have their broken theology, I think also colonized theology, to be completely fair and honest, that stands in the way of them allowing their own people to flourish. Yeah. I also found a couple of other friends, childhood friends, who I was also like not even super close with, right? From the Bengali community, who reached out and were like, do you want to come to like my girls only Halloween party? I was like, yes. Oh my gosh, right?
Bengali girls of St. Louis greater metro area unite. That's so powerful, cute, love it. Wow. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Ameera, for sharing so much of yourself, for creating this
Thank you,
beautiful
Ameera.
space with us over the last couple episodes.